world. With over 20 years of sales leadership experience, my next guest has a career highlighted by building, developing, and enhancing successful sales teams. He has firsthand knowledge when it comes to the difficulty of starting B2B sales cycles and second to none experience in the fast-paced world of B2B sales. Please welcome B2B sales veteran and our newest member of the Oktopost team, Jason Stone, our VP sales, to the show. Jason, are you ready to get radically transparent with me?
I'm ready, especially after that introduction, which was far too nice.
Fantastic. Listen, it's always a treat to have anyone from the sales organization of any company on this show because so many marketers are always dying to get inside of our counterparts over at sales, inside of their heads. And before we get started, I do want to ask if you might be able to give us a super brief look at your professional journey and what actually attracted you to join Oktopost as our first ever VP Sales North America.
Sure. The more you get to know me, the more you'll understand that it's hard for me to be brief, but I'll do everything I possibly can. So my background really, cut my teeth in sales and selling yellow pages, if you can imagine that. So print ads. And as the industry progressed and tried to progress, I should say, and we developed some digital products, I was attracted to that digital side of the business and ended up being on the national side where we were enhancing print advertising for national brands and turning them into digital placement. And then, as the career progressed through that, it went from national to running local teams and really loved the leadership aspect of sales. Felt like I was a pretty good salesperson, but I was better at process and better at helping other folks kind of harness their ability. And then from there, I left and went to an agency side position to where I built out their digital capabilities to resell to clients. So went to creative focused company or agency to really kind of figuring out how we could take the creative side of it, ad placement, everything, and turn it into a digital experience as well. So did that for 7 years and then kind of jumped over into some startups. So the last 3 experiences I've had have been in startup mode and looking to try and gain market share. Had one IPO under my belt, one founder ran company that's better off than it was when I found it or when I came on board, and then we had another purchase. So then here I am at Oktopost, and really the attraction for Oktopost was the space. Having been in charge of or responsible of driving social activity and trying to understand what was influenced by social activity, there's a desperate need for what we do and in the B2B space. So really excited to be able to come on board and try and establish a North America presence and help Oktopost grow.
We're excited to have you, first off. We're definitely going to dive in. You shared some key words, I would say, or very important phrases, right? But the value of social, we're going to get into it all: social selling, the relationship between sales and marketing. It's why we have you on this show. But before we dive into those relationships and kind of deep dive into those topics, I know on the marketing side, marketers rarely sleep, but I would have to make the argument that who might actually sleep less are our sales counterparts. You guys are the boots on the ground. You're in the forefront, really, with the customers, understanding what's happening in the field. And I would be amiss to not ask you what on earth is keeping you up at night as a sales leader these days professionally.
Besides my 3-year-old daughter, what keeps me up at night is uh, execution and urgency. Those are the 2 things that I think about a lot. I always feel like you can build a process for everybody to follow, but they have to be able to execute on that process. And then there's the urgency for me is key in a sales role. Um, and my experience, urgency just gets diluted naturally through the sales process, right? And what I mean by that is, it's never as urgent for the buyer as it is for the sales rep. It's never as urgent for the sales rep as it is for a sales leader or myself. And no matter how hard I try or intensify my urgency, it's never going to match my boss's urgency or the CEO's urgency or the board's urgency. So there's this level of dilution as you go through, and it's to be able to highlight and actually spotlight urgency. Really, it shouldn't be a highlight. You should really spotlight it. I think it's key to being able to move the sales process in a much more efficient and effective manner. One of the things I always look at is, how take inbound leads, for instance. And you talk about Harvard Business Review did a study a while back. It said 37% of of customers or companies follow up on leads within 30 minutes, and so that means 67% haven't followed up or didn't follow up within that time frame. And then the other piece that when you look at statistics show that if you follow up in the first 5 minutes with an inbound lead, right, it's 21 times more likely or more effective, I should say, than reaching out after 30 minutes. So the question I always have when I read studies like that is, then why did only 26% of 37% of the companies follow up within the first 5 minutes? Right? It would have been much more appealing or um, thought provoking had it been 25% of the total, but it wasn't. It was 25% of the smaller percentage that followed up within the 30 minutes. So when I look at that, that's a lack of urgency. And those are the things that I think we can, it's in our control. And in the sales process and in sales and in marketing, there are a lot of things that are out of our control. So when I think about keeping me up at night, it's how do we control our own urgency? And I always use the analogy of, I mean, could you imagine the effect that it would have on, Chick-fil-A sales if you sat at the counter and somebody stood in front of you and didn't respond for 5 minutes? I mean, think about that for a second, right? The idea about somebody reaching out to us, and this is just one example of urgency, and the lack of urgency that we have in follow up is critical. And then execution. It's not to be strewn together. There's a fine line between the urgency and execution, because if you mix the two, you can be urgent and your execution can be haphazard.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about timing. It's about making sure that you put the first things first. I always classify two things in two buckets: the critical few versus the meaningless many. And an email follow up to someone I'm in process with is not as urgent to me in the process as somebody who has raised their hand and wants to schedule a demo. Right. I
Mhm.
could put that email on the side, execute on the outreach from an inbound lead, and then come back to those things. So it's always just balancing those few versus the meaningless many. But execution is also key, because urgency mixed again with execution could allow you to miss steps. And if you miss steps in a sales process, you're going to lose more often than you win. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely, and I
yeah.
think what's interesting, everything you're speaking about, this gives me a lot of food for thought as a marketer. Even as you're speaking, right, execution and urgency, and this is really a great avenue where sales and marketing have an opportunity to come together and almost identify those gaps, whether it's in execution and how sales can pick it up, or where an automated email might come in handy, just to again continue for that end user, that experience or that service or whatever it may be, to keep that process going forward. So I think there's a lot of food for thought for us marketers listening in. I want to jump to a true or false question,
Okay.
and hop back. But right, because as you were speaking, something that kind of came back from my sales days was, right, in order to execute and to really know your urgency, I think you also, probably as a sales professional, really need to know the service or product that you are selling. So true or false, from a sales perspective, should marketers be thinking about products the way salespeople do?
It's a it's an interesting question, and I have to be careful about how I how I answer it. No, here's what I believe. I believe marketing should think about how salespeople sell the product versus thinking about the product like a salesperson. I know it seems like I'm dodging the question, but I think it's important for marketers to maintain a product market fit mentality.
Mhm.
But I believe that the most successful teams take a how to sell into consideration. And conversely, I mean, what I would also say is it's not all on marketing to adopt and make changes, right? I think that sales has to accept responsibility for blown leads, poor response time, and all of those things. But if we can break common ground on the difficulty of each other's jobs, then I think we'll always be more closely aligned for success. It's very easy for salespeople to say that the leads are terrible, right? It's also very easy for marketing to say that sales isn't executing, and both jobs are extremely difficult. And I think that I think if we looked at each other's jobs and how we function more so than just the product, I believe we could be aligned for more success overall. Does that answer the question or no?
That does answer the question and leads nicely into my next one, right? Because, talking about kind of putting almost, right, wearing the other's shoes. And if we kind of step back and, I don't know, maybe a marketer attended a sales call, or a sales professional sat in on the buyer journey and website mapping of some sort for customer journeys, right? Maybe that would be super helpful for one another. But in that sense, well, we have the opportunity to have you on the show. What is one thing that by far stands out to you that you wish marketers would understand about sales that you feel at this time they do not?
That's again another great question, and again I need to be very careful. I would say I would just say that, like as we just discussed, right? I think the one thing we have to look at, and if the question was reversed and say what would I want sales to understand about marketing, it would be the same answer, and that all leads are not created equal, right? And what I mean by that is we have to identify what buyers, well, I should say buying signs look like, right? We have to understand what the value of each particular um, interaction with our brand is. I think we'd all raise our hand and say, I want every inbound lead that says they want a demo request, right? That's valuable. We know that. That there are other things out there. We've seen downloaded some white papers. Well, we've also seen that could be a student, down the street doing a research paper on, in this instance, social media activity, the importance of social connections, those types of things. Um, uh, and as we learn, we need to share. That goes back to that cross functional operation of how do we execute at a higher level. And you mentioned automated emails, right? So there could be something involved, and once we figure out what the customer journey is and what it looks like for any activity, that could be a webinar registrant, could be a webinar attendee, it could be a webinar attendee that asks questions. What's the likelihood of those progressing? What are the steps that need to be taken next? And those are all things we have to figure out. But I've been with teams where sales has received a lot of quote unquote leads. And as the problem we have, and not viewing it in a sales fashion, right or wrong, which I do think this is the mentality of sales individuals. And I think it's up to leadership to make sure that mentality doesn't happen. But what happens is the value of each lead dilutes over time as you continue to deliver leads. And we know that at best we're probably going to convert 30% of the leads that we get, right, to an opportunity. And then the closed one ratio is going to depend upon the individual sales reps, and when you look at industry, vertical, company size, all those things. But we know that that's going to, I don't know where that 30% falls. So if I talk to 100 people, I may have to talk to 70 people before I have my first conversion. if that's the case, just natural selection would tell you that by the time I get to that 70th conversation, I'm starting to not believe in the leads. So what's in that 100 lead, bucket? Is it webinar registrants? Is it downloads of white paper? Are there things in there that we can put into a different path,
Mm.
right? Um, Now, again, it's up to me as a sales leader to make sure that we don't lose interest and we don't dilute those leads over time. Um, and I think we've done a really nice job of converting and diverting leads to to where they need to be right now. We're still learning, so I think. But I've seen companies that just pound any sort of activity on a website or any sort of connectivity with the brand to salespeople. And then what happens is salespeople, like, they lose focus. They don't have the lack of urgency, right? Sense of urgency drops. Execution fails because they just are going through the motions because I've talked to 30 people today and nothing's happening. So we lose ourselves in that whole process. If that makes sense, I'm happy to go a little deeper if needs
No,
be.
listen, it makes a lot of sense, and I think that's a big piece of what a lot of marketers don't quite understand, that, if a lead over time, right, the value or the likelihood to close, let's say, or whatever it may be, decreases over time. That's something really important for marketers to know. And just like what you were saying, right, a lot of times, us marketers, we've got to get people to sign up that, for that webinar or download that white paper, and we're maybe measured on different metrics, but ultimately we're after the same goal, right? We need to increase revenue for the entire organization. So I think you bring up a valid point there. Now, you mentioned something about intent and understanding kind of that intent data, or when somebody's ready to buy, right? And starting to understand those patterns. And just, having you as a sales professional here, I'm so curious to talk to you about your view and your thoughts in terms of, right, this social selling concept, if you will. Is social selling just selling in the modern day? How active or how incorporated are your teams when it comes to social selling? And could you walk us through a little bit about how you're actually incorporating kind of the social selling mindset, if you will, throughout your team?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have the easiest excuse in the book, right? We work for a social management platform, so we should be connecting with everybody we talk to. So that's first and foremost. I mean, the implementation for me is we have to connect and we have to expand our network inside organizations. And that's no secret sauce. I think everybody should do that. When you look at what's 8 years ago, it was six people were involved in a buying decision. Now it's upwards of 10. Right. So how do we get connected to those people? How do we understand the DNA of an organization and how buying decisions are made? And so I do think it's critical for us to connect the folks. That's the very first step. And then, it's I I would say that social selling to me is being relevant and being in front of your prospect and being helpful. Right? We're not going to sell anything socially. We're going to influence and we're going to educate, and that's a huge part of it. When you think about 66% of the buyers don't want to have any interaction with the sales rep, right? So when you think about that, how do you help educate and help influence them through social media, right? So I think connecting is the first part, and then being thrusted into this remote environment, it's becoming the norm. It's how people are communicating. There are people that will not respond to emails that will respond to LinkedIn messages. That's just how it is. That's just like me. I'll respond to a text faster than I'll respond to anything, right? But I respond to all of my LinkedIn, even if I don't know the individual and they're reaching out to me. I just not everybody does that, but it's just business courteous to me to be able to respond to somebody and say, "Hey, we're not interested right now. Thanks so much for reaching out. Let me know if I can help you." Those types of things. I think people are more genuine when you talk to them one on one. And if you can't get them on the phone, it's easy to ignore an email. It's very hard to ignore a profile and very hard to ignore connection in a social environment. So I do think that it starts with connection, starts with trying to understand what the people do in the organization, how to make your communication relevant to them, and then staying connected and continuing to educate, because the process is, because I engage with you doesn't mean I'm actually looking for anything right now. But chances are that there will be development down the road that I will have to address. And to be, again, relevant, not pushy, not salesy, just friendly education, I think, is key.
So it's no secret that here at Oktopost, right, we build an employee advocacy platform. And the term there, I think which a lot of people will say, okay, social selling, employee advocacy, right? It's essentially your employees advocating for your company. Social selling can be done right through an advocacy app or platform. But I'm curious a little bit just to understand in a brief sentence or two for the marketers who are listening in, leading employee advocacy or thinking about assisting sales with social selling. What would you say is the best type of content that resonates with your audience specifically? Or what you would wish to see more of in terms of an advocacy program content wise.
Yeah, again, I think content that educates, content that stresses the importance. It's Yeah, I'm a huge Christmas fan. It's probably, Thanksgiving and Christmas is my two favorite times a year. And, every year we watch Miracle on 34th Street. And, the Santa that sends everybody to Gimbals if they don't have it. We have to be the voice of reason and education, in my opinion. And we're not going to win every prospect over. We know that we should, because we're awesome, but we're not going to. That's just reality. But to be able to educate and to allow folks to make an intelligent decision, and and I mean that in like the truest sense of the word. Budget is not intelligence. Budget's restrictive, right? So you want to be intelligent about what you are trying to implement and the importance of it. So when I talk about content for us, I think anything that we have that is driven to educate and better understand the importance of employee advocacy. And when you talk about the question previous, that's what it's all about. When we're talking education, that's about the content that you all provide to us, and we're able to push it out and help educate and influence folks. That's employee advocacy. They're People do business with people, not brands, and they also, our employees network, it, we all of a sudden have a massive outreach ability, more so than you can possibly imagine. When you talk about 3 degrees, I look at some of the connections that I have on LinkedIn, and it's like 3 degrees. I have 90,000 people. That's impossible, but it's true. So it's a it's an extremely powerful um, tool, and I think we're gonna start seeing more people lean towards it. But I believe content in the sense of just education um, and influence, I think, are key.
I like that. My grandfather once told me that education and learning is the only thing that nobody can take away from you. So I definitely am in your camp, right? That when you're providing that educational content to somebody that's going to really help them understand or learn something that they didn't know before, that is quite possibly the most valuable. Now, with keeping true to our 30-minute episodes, I have two questions left for you. And the one question I have, it's around our favorite topic. We kind of hinted at it earlier around revenue, right? And we both agreed, right? I'm from marketing side and you're from the sales side. We both agreed that revenue is a shared responsibility. So what I'm curious to know right now is what are you doing as VP sales at Octopost to currently step out of your comfort zone to work cross functionally to help reach that target goal of revenue?
It starts with a podcast, um, for sure,
Thanks,
and
Jason.
um, yeah, yeah. Right now, it's really understanding everybody's role. and understanding what we're focused on, and then bringing ideas to the table that again, like we said, uh, webinar registrants might not be the best thing in sales hands. So let's figure out another avenue for it to go to, so that we can be more efficient on what we are following up on, which is valuable inbound leads at whatever level it may be. So yeah, right now it's just learning, and I don't ever take anybody's job for granted and think that anybody's job is easy, because it's not. And there's jobs out there that I do not want to do, and I have no desire to do them. So I try to respect everybody's role and responsibility. So it's really just about learning, and then what they need from me, so that we can all work together.
Nice, nice. So I'm loving this stepping out of the comfort zone. I look forward to the Octopost sales and marketing teams doing it more with you on board, and really reaching true alignment with our revenue goals for 2022 and beyond. So my last question for you today, it's a favorite, it's a fan favorite. And we know from earlier in the show, we know that one of the things keeping you up at night is your toddler daughter. So we know you have children, so that cannot be a fun fact. But what is something that you can tell us right now that if we were to look on your LinkedIn profile, we wouldn't be able to know because it is not there?
Oh boy. I sing in the shower. No, that wouldn't be it.
You say in
I,
the shower, you want to do a little tune for us now?
no, that's why I do it in the shower, because nobody wants to hear it. That's probably the fact that I've dabbled in improv comedy. Um,
Really?
yeah, so it's with three kids and a social media profile and image to uphold. Sadly, I'm a bit rusty, but yeah, it started with an activity for selling. Just to be thinking on your feet, be quick, and I fell in love with it. And so I've it's been a while, but and I've done it with all my teams. So
So you're
anybody that listens.
saying right now, if I were to like give you a scenario, like on a bus, New York City, churro falls on the floor, someone asks you for directions, ready, go, you'd be ready to go.
It might take me a minute. I might need more coffee, but yeah. But
All
yeah, it
right.
was those were the scenarios. They were fun. It's a blast.
Amazing. Well, listen, I mean, there's no telling where this show can go. And if we think that we can get some fun improv, I mean, maybe that's the route we need to head over. And Jason, you'll be the man that we call on to get our improv show going. But thank you so much for joining me today. My last question, like I usually call it a half question, but it is an important one. Anyone listening wants to get more inside of the head of a sales leader, reach or connect out to you to learn more, where is the best place to reach you? I know you mentioned LinkedIn is a fan favorite. Anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter, and I'm happy to give my email address. It's just jstone@octopost.com. So feel free to shoot me any message. I am as transparent as they come. At least I try to be. Sometimes it gets me into trouble, I've, but
Well,
yeah, I'm happy to answer anything, or speak with anybody that has any questions.
fantastic. jstone@octopost.com, Jason Stone on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to him on Twitter. Jason, it's been an absolute pleasure. Welcome to the team. And we are so excited to have had the opportunity to get radically transparent with you today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Radically Transparent podcast, brought to you by Oktopost, the only social media management and employee advocacy platform architected for B2B. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and director of social strategy here at Oktopost. And if you love today's show, we'd love if you subscribe, rate, and give a raving review wherever you get your podcasts. For more discussion on B2B social media marketing, be sure to follow Oktopost on LinkedIn. And of course, to gain access to all our free social media marketing and employee advocacy resources, head on over to our website, www.octopost.com. Until next time.